book is Gail's mother, My Family Story of Race and Racial Passing. And we're going to talk more with Gail coming up about what other ramifications, what other family members she discovered after doing her research and in writing her book. And I believe also your book has now been optioned for a TV series, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right.
Okay, we'll talk all about that with Gail Lukaszak from Libertyville, Illinois. All that coming up. And if you have a question for her too, it's 312-981-7200. White Like Her, My Family Story of Race and Racial Passing. We have, we're going to continue our conversation with award-winning author from Libertyville, Illinois, Gail Lukaszak. Gail, this is a fascinating book. And by the way, Jasmine really was intrigued by this story. So producer Jasmine, if you have a question, be sure to let us know there, because I'm sure Gail would love to answer it. But basically, the book is a personal exploration about your mother's decision to hide her African-American heritage and pass for white. And it wasn't something you discovered until you became an adult, and then you had to, promise her that you would keep it a secret until after her death. I'm just curious, you ended up doing so much research. Did you end up discovering new family members throughout this?
I did, and it came about in a very serendipitous way. My mother passed, she died in April 2014, and 2 months almost to the day, I had an opportunity to find out the truth of my mother's heritage, and that was through PBS's Genealogy Roadshow. They were looking for family stories related to New Orleans. So I did apply for the show, and I was on the show. And one of the revelations that Kenyatta Berry, who was the genealogist at the time, made was that my grandfather, I knew he had remarried, but I didn't know that he had 5 additional children. And so that was a shock to me. And I said at the end of the show that I would love to find these people, my family.
Right.
Well, 3 days later, I get an email from a woman who says her name is Stephanie Frederick. My heart is beating as I'm reading this email, and she said, my father is Azima Frederick Jr., who is your mother's half-brother. I'm your cousin, and we want to welcome you to our family. I read that email, and I sobbed. At that point in my life, my parents were gone. Mm-hmm. All my aunts and uncles I ever knew were gone. And suddenly I have an uncle.
Were they just as surprised as you were?
They didn't know I existed. There had been a big fracture in the family because my grandfather had died very young, so they were very young children when he died, so they weren't aware that he had a first family. Mm-hmm. So that's why we didn't know about each other.
And I imagine that you're very close now. And how interesting, too, that this cousin that reached out to you, she has a media background. And of course, you had been a poet and an author, and similarities there.
Very much so, yes. Stephanie has her own film production company, FGW Productions in Los Angeles, and initially she said she knew I was going to come to New Orleans and we were going to have a reunion. She wanted to know if she could film the whole thing, which she did too. She's a documentarian. But as of late, after the book came out and it was so successful, she decided she was going to option the book, and she did, and she's optioned it for a TV dramatic series. So that's where we're at right now, and hopefully this will be moving ahead soon.
Gail, what would your mother think about this? Your mother didn't want anyone to know, and now to think about it, she is going to be her story, which is beautiful in ways and tragic in ways, because I think she sacrificed a lot, and it had to have been lonely, but I think she also did it because she wanted to give herself and her children the best life possible at that time period, right?
Yeah.
What do you think she would think?
I thought about that, and of course she didn't want that revealed when she was living, but I think right now she's looking down and thinking, this is great. I'm going to be in a TV series. My mother had a very dramatic flair to her, so I think she would like that part.
My goodness, I recommend that everybody purchase your book and read your book, or check it out from the library, because and also Google your story, because then they can see the photos of your mother. And my goodness, she does look like a movie star. She
was a very beautiful woman. She really was.
So I do think she would be pleased.
I know. Well, it's all her fault, because she sent me to all these schools, to drama school and all this. She wanted me to do these things, so it's all her fault.
And of course, this was relevant to have you, because this is a very interesting narrative and personal history that you have about race, and of course mixed race, and it was interesting too that your cousin also did a documentary on being lighter-skinned African American.
She did, and that aired the same week as the Genealogy Roadshow I was on.
Oh, how bizarre.
I mean, we talk about that sometimes, how weird that was. It was like it was meant to be.
Just the coincidences there are just incredible.
Yeah.
But what, in terms of as things unfold across the nation, I mean, not only here, but of course protests are happening all around the world. What have you been thinking, or do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about what's happening in America in terms of the George Floyd fallout and the civil social justice movement?
Yeah, I do have thoughts, and I've been thinking of it because in terms of what I do, I whenever I'm asked to talk about my mother's story, I'm out there telling the story of racism. And most of the time, not all the time, my audiences are white. And I want to just share with you an encounter that happened a few years ago with a white audience. After I told my mother's story, I had a woman come up to me afterwards, and she said, I have to tell you something personal. Mm-hmm. And she said, I used to work with an African-American man, and he was an affirmative action hire, and I resented him every day I worked with him. And she said, after I heard your mother's story, I want to tell you that I am so ashamed of myself. and I will never do that again. And I thought later, because she listened to this story, she heard it, she felt that she had license to tell me her story. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to do. We have to listen to each other, because from listening comes understanding, and from understanding comes change and action. So I feel very privileged to be able to tell my mother's story to others. Well, I really do.
We feel privileged to be able to read it, eventually soon to watch it once the television series comes out, and privileged that you shared your mother's story with us. And my goodness, Gail, you still have a lot of that poet left in you. So thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, it was wonderful. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. That was Gail Lukasik, Lukasik. She is from Libertyville, Illinois, and she's an award-winning author. The book she was talking about was about her mother, and it's entitled White Like Her, My Family Story of Race and Racial Passing. Wanted to mention Gail's other books. She was a mystery writer and had a series of mystery books. They're called Destroying Angels, Death's Door, and Peak Season for Murder. And the cousin that has now optioned out her book to turn it into a TV series that she mentioned, the cousin's name is Stephanie Frederick of FGW Productions. You've probably seen her work as well, because she did a 6-part A&E docu-series focusing on the investigation 20 years after the death of Tupac, called Who Killed Tupac? Of course, the prolific rapper and actor Tupac Shakur. And then also her other credits, the cousin's credits from FGW Productions as Light Girls that you might have seen on OWN, and Eyes on the Prize Then and Now on PBS. I just wanted to mention all of those in case you wanted to check them out. I'm curious, have you done Ancestry.com or any of those DNA tests, those kits where you can go buy them now? They're, even at Target and Walmart, I think you can just get them there. Swab your mouth with just swab the inside of your mouth and send off that saliva, and then figure out who your relatives might be or what your background is. I've even heard of friends who have discovered long lost relatives as well doing that. Just curious if you've ever done that or have an interesting story from doing that. 312-981-7200. Jasmine, have you done one of those yet?
Not yet, no. I'm curious, and I will get to it, but not yet.
I really want to do it because I don't know much about my background, because my family history just doesn't go that far back. So I'm very curious. My mother didn't know her mother because my mom was an orphan. So she's never really known her background. So who knows? Who knows? My mother could be something. So who knows what I might discover.
Yeah, same here. I do know that my grandmother was one of the first African-American seamstress in Union Springs, Alabama. So I do know that she was very known in the community and helping people out. But as far as backwards, I don't know. So that is something interesting. I'm looking forward to learning.
Well, how did you know that about your grandmother being this renowned seamstress?
Well, my father told me, and then it was passed on to me. But my father has passed away and my mother has passed away. So a lot of these things are, I guess, holes and gaps that I just don't know.
Do you have a lot of old family pictures?
I do, but it's more so on my father's side and my mother's side. And I have to call my aunts and my uncles like, hey, can I see this? Can I see that? And they're like, sure. And then they go on in their long spiel. And I'm like, okay, so back to the main question. Who is this? One of those things.
Well, I just love that most families have that one person that sort of takes care of keeping track of family history and genealogy. There's always that one person that takes a personal interest and sort of becomes the curator of all of the artifacts, being old photos or special items that have been passed down generation to generation in the family.
Right.
I always find that so fascinating. And I think you got to be so grateful for whoever that person is that archives those photos. You've heard a lot about people going through closets and organizing throughout this pandemic and the stay-at-home order. And I was seeing so many old photos being posted on social media. And it was such a beautiful thing to see where people were rediscovering their history and then also figuring out a way, because, photos disintegrate over time. So you have to digitize those photos so that way they can stay on and be passed down through generations. And for somebody like me, who I don't know much about my family history and I don't have a lot of old photos, and I think you're so lucky if you're someone that comes from a family that has cherished those items and kept up with those items, and you have pictures of your great grandparents or great grandparents. I think that's pretty remarkable, but it's just a beautiful thing when you can discover more about your background and history, because I do think it's so incredible to see how far generations come, generation to generation. And it's always that one person that's managed to undertake discovering who's part of the family tree and keeping that for the rest of the family. So yeah, you should buy that person dinner. That's what I think. More coming up. I'm super excited about that treasure story. I've been following it along as more has been said about it on different news stories. Hi, Steve. It's G. You're live on the air.
Great. How are you doing there?
Doing well. So I think you actually know a lot about your family history, huh?
I do, only because it was actually an assignment when I was in high school. And we're talking, 30 years ago, or more actually, over 40 years ago now at this point. Yeah, and it really, it was one of the most, at the risk of hyperbole, probably one of the most important things I ever did in high school. And certainly resonated throughout history, for the last decades with my family. We still refer to it. I sent it out to my relatives. It was an assignment. We had to do it. It was not optional. We got graded. And I'll throw out the teacher, Mr. Marchessault. It was my junior year. It was social studies. and everyone in the class had to do their family history. You first did your general, like, whatever ethnicity you were. I'm Italian, so I looked into the Italian history just generally as immigrants. And then you did your own personal history. And it was really, as you know, time keeps going forward. People pass. The stories are lost. So you don't do it now, it's going to get worse 10, 20 years from now.
What an incredible high school assignment. And by the way, did you do Ancestry.com yet or one of those DNA tests?
I did not. I will tell you. No, I know I had a sibling did a DNA test. I did not do Ancestry. I think I had one of my siblings' husbands did it. But I will tell you, though, I will warn you, only because Consumer Reports did an article review of this probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And their review, I would just be cautioned if everyone's going to do that, because when they did it, and they had about, I think, 5 of their staffers do it, and their review was less than exemplary. As far as
well, it sounds like the work you did in high school was way better than that. So, Steve, that's awesome, and it's lovely that it stood the test of time. I appreciate you calling in and telling me about it.
No problem. Have a nice day there.
You as well. Thanks so much. How cool is that? Steve did a high school project, and it's lasted this long. And it's been a reference and a resource for his family for 30, 40 years, he said, which I can't even believe because he doesn't sound like he's been out of high school that long. Jasmine, I bet you don't have a high school assignment that's lasted that long.
No,
and been
I haven't.
That useful. Me either.
I have to think about it. I don't think so, though.
Steve, that takes the cake. Thanks so much for calling in. We're going to replay Bob Surratt's interview with social media strategist Scott Kleinberg in case you missed it this morning.
Every week we check in with social media strategist Scott Kleinberg. Hello, Scott. How are you today?
I'm good, Bob. How are you doing?
Good. Anxious to hear about Facebook and changes they're considering. First, it was Twitter taking action against President Trump's tweets. Then Snapchat removed him from their Discover section. So what is Facebook doing?
So if there's one person who really doesn't like to admit he's wrong, it's Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg. And right now what's happening is Facebook employees are really, really pushing back on the way things are being run. And one of the things about Zuckerberg is that he is hopelessly stubborn. He really always feels that he knows what's best for Facebook because he built it. But this past week has been a week of searing criticism that came from employees in a way that, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen anything like this. There have been a few that have publicly resigned over his decision to not remove Trump's post, and we're talking about the post that was removed on Twitter and, with the warning on Twitter and all that stuff. So now it looks like Zuckerberg is listening and maybe doing a little bit of changing.
So, the argument here is that Facebook should allow opinions of all sorts to live on the site.
Yes, exactly. And, he acknowledges that the decision that he made left a lot of employees angry and disappointed and hurt. He says, you're right. He says that Facebook is always going to continue to stand for giving everyone a voice. And he's very, very big on erring on the side of free expression when it comes to difficult situations. Do you leave something up? Do you take something down? And for him, it's always, if it's something that is really a direct threat of violence, take it down, which all the platforms have. But everything else should probably stay up. And he says that what's really important about that is that even if it's speech that they really, really disagree with, he wants to make sure that people hear that speech. But he's also committed to making sure that things that are really coming into light now, like racial justice and voter engagement, he says that he wants to look at ideas. Now, one of the things to stress about this, Bob, is that none of these may actually come to fruition, but the fact that anything is under review is a really giant step. So, for example, he says that they're going to review policies allowing discussion and threats of state use of force to see if there's anything they should change. Okay, that's a basic basic line. Then he says they're going to review policies around voter suppression. There's a lot of talk on there now about, we've talked about, mail-in ballots and things like that. And right now, nothing, if somebody posts something about, incorrect about mail-in ballots, that's going to stay up. That's not changing. So he's going to look into that. And one of the biggest things right now is they're looking for ways to handle things aside from this general up and down. Right now, if something gets taken off of Facebook, it's taken down. I mean, that's it. There's no explanation why, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, if something is taken down, you'll really never know why. It just is gone. Twitter added those little notes to let people know it was happening. This, they're just going to decide to take down. So their current policy is the one that is causing the problem, and he's looking into the possibility of some sort of label or something like that. But again, there's no guarantee that anything like that is going to happen, but just the fact that he's moving in that direction and he's respecting people's ideas, that is a really big move in Facebook world.
Well, he's got a lot of opinion coming at him. The pandemic, the protests, the election season, and it's all come together. I know that there's a COVID info hub that Facebook has, and now they're building a voter hub, aren't they?
They're building a voter hub, basically doubling down. They've had previous work where they've tried to get out the vote. So if you've been on Facebook and you get a pop-up at the top that says, are you one of the 10 million people that voted today? Let your friends know that you're voting. They've been doing that for a very long time. What this hub is, now the COVID hub has been really, really successful. It's basically a little tab at the bottom of your Facebook that's on your mobile app, and it's basically every single thing that you need to know about COVID in your area. So you're logged in Illinois, it tells you what's happening in Illinois, it gives you, the latest stats and what's happening with phase 3 and all of these things. So now they're looking into creating a voter hub that is just like that with everything you need to know in your area. So it comes back to, how can we fight voter suppression? How can we make sure that we're giving everybody the accurate information they need? But the one thing they have to be careful of is, it's an extra step that people have to go through to get there. And on Facebook, that's always a dangerous thing. Sometimes having something in the feed is what matters the most. But the COVID hub has been, organized and helpful. So hopefully it's something that they can actually have success with.
And when will that be on Facebook, Scott?
That it doesn't look like it is imminent, although they say they want something for August. So, we have the election coming up in November, so hopefully soon. But right now it's looking like August for a wider rollout.
And how do you access that COVID info hub?
So the COVID info hub right now is, if you're on your laptop, you just go to facebook.com and you'll see it at the top. If you're on your mobile app, which more people get onto Facebook that way, there's little tabs at the bottom that tell you the different things, your home feed, your messages, and there's a little symbol in the middle that's a medical symbol, and you hover over it and it says COVID. And it's really, really well done. It's definitely something to check out if you haven't checked it out.
When it comes to the pandemic, people are hungry for facts. They don't want this politicized. So if you go to that Facebook COVID hub, can we be confident that we're getting the straight dope on that?
That is actually a really good question. And yes, that is a lot different than the politicized stuff. That is really stuff that's coming from the CDC, and it's coming from the World Health Organization, and it's really things, and local government. So it's really telling you the things that you need to know from a national perspective. You can look at things state by state. And like I said, you can look at things locally. So if you really want to find out, there's all different ways for, to find out, what's happening with the different phases. But this is a way to link to those sites to find out those things. So they really want it to be a one-stop shop. And that's one of the things about Facebook. They always want you to go to Facebook and nowhere else. So they think that if nowhere else existed, you should be able to get everything from Facebook. It's a lofty goal. And this, in that way, helps make sure that you really don't have to go anywhere else if you were to check this thing every day.
Sure. Continuing our conversation with social media strategist Scott Kleinberg. Scott, what do we need to know about the new photo deal with Twitter?
Well, I think this is really great. When you upload an image to your tweet, now this is on both your laptop and your phone, but when you upload an image to your tweet, you may notice a little button on the image marked Alt, A-L-T, and it's in all capital letters. And what that stands for is alt text, and it basically means that people who use screen readers, the visually impaired, are able to interpret images in tweets. Now, Twitter has allowed for this since 2016, but not in a very intuitive way. I mean, in fact, most people would be surprised to know that the feature was ever there. It was under a sub-menu and another sub-menu where you can go to if you wanted to, but no one would ever know that was there. So this means that people who hadn't considered using alt text before will be more aware of the option, which means that hopefully they'll take the time to do it. And at the end of the day, what it really means is really major benefits for visually impaired users, which is an audience that Twitter has been really trying to tell that they care about.
So this is something everyone should do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, really, Bob, it comes back to how much you value the platform and the experience others have using the platform. I mean, you know how I've talked to you over the years about how it's so important, I say, that Twitter users make Twitter better by doing things like reporting tweets and doing things, the responsible way. This falls squarely into the category of making Twitter better. Nearly 8 million people in the U.S. have some sort of visual disability. So it's providing basic descriptors within your images, and that can have a really major impact on their entire online usage experience.
How easy is it to do this?
Actually, this part is really, really easy. They really did a good job of that. So here's an example. If I upload a photo to a tweet of a rainbow over the Chicago skyline, I would click on the button that says Alt, and it'll give me a little thing that tells me I have 1,000 characters, and I would type I would type in the description to the alt text field. So I would say something like, beautiful photo of rainbow over Wrigley Field after severe thunderstorms exited the Chicago area. Just something that's really, really simple, quick, and easy, so when people are using their assistive technology, they know exactly what they're seeing in that photo. And remember, you get 1,000 characters, so you want it to be useful, but you don't want to go on and on. You want it to be concise, and you want it to be descriptive. And once it's posted, the description, it's not visible to you, and you'll never see it again. But people who are using these assistive technologies, there are different ways of doing that. There's third-party devices. There's the iPhone has its own way of doing it. There's all different ways. But visually impaired people will have access to the description, and it'll be like they're able to see the picture. And, I look at it as, you're allowing someone who can't appreciate what you're sharing to be able to appreciate it. And, Twitter has to, it was up to Twitter to make this more useful, and they really come out and have done that. It's just one of those things that can really make a big difference.
Yeah, you gotta love that. Scott Kleinberg with the up-to-the-minute news on social media. Thanks, as always, Scott. Look forward to our talk next week.
You can hear a lot more of Bob Surratt on WGNradio.com. A lot of his interviews are in podcast form, and of course, starting at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Want to thank all of our guests that was on the show tonight, and thank you so much for listening. I know that there's still severe weather watches and warnings happening right now, so hope you continue to be safe, and hope that you don't suffer any damage throughout the night as well. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and hope you